guys. So today we're going to be starting part one of a two-part presentation on rhetorical appeals, academic persuasion, and logic. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how rhetorical appeals is one sort of strategy within rhetorical knowledge, just like considering different modes, considering different genre features, thinking about what your audience needs, all of those things. And then we're also going to be going over each of 4 different appeals. We're going to be doing practice specifically with 3 of them, and you have an activity that you're going to be doing. And then we're going to kind of focus more on the logic end, a little bit more heavily on Wednesday. So we're going to go ahead and get started with part 1, which is just rhetorical appeals. This is the shorter of the 2 presentations. Where we're going to start is just looking at the rhetorical triangles. This is just a picture that kind of shows all 4 appeals kind of in context. So there are four appeals. I know a lot of people who have covered the rhetorical triangle before, talked about rhetorical appeals, have covered 3. And the 3 that people have usually covered are ethos, which is credibility. I've actually used that term a good bit this semester already in terms of you checking your authors of your sources, credibility, checking their sources, thinking about their bias, thinking about their expertise, things like that. And when you're thinking about ethos, the reason why kind of wanted to go over the rhetorical triangle is just to also show like how this fits into the writing situation. Remember, writing situations, or all communication situations, have those 3 parts. You have the writer, you have the genre or the type of text, and the text itself, the thing that you're using to communicate, and then you also have the audience. So you're also thinking about ethos is the trustworthiness of the writer. It's how, if you're the author of that text, you're building up that sense of trust, your own credibility with your audience. If you're thinking about logos, that refers specifically to the text, the message, the reasons that you're giving people. If you're thinking about pathos, that specifically kind of focuses on the audience. So each of these 3 appeals kind of focuses on what you're doing with a different part of the writing situation. And then we're going to go over the 4th appeal and the lesser talked about appeal, which is kairos, which kind of applies more to the actual context of the writing situation. It has to do with how current and relevant and timely the argument that you're making is. So we're going to go first into just kind of an overview of the rhetorical appeals. 1, rhetorical appeals and rhetorical knowledge are not the same thing. Rhetorical knowledge is that sort of umbrella, sort of all-encompassing knowledge of how writing situations work, and it includes knowing the components of the writing situation you have to think about, and also thinking about the strategies that you have to communicate in that situation. And those strategies include, considering modes, thinking about genre features, thinking about or anticipating your audience needs, thinking about whatever the in this case, the academic features are, thinking about clarity, thinking about those kinds of things. And also thinking about rhetorical appeals, thinking about how you are going to appeal to your audience and make a well-rounded argument by thinking about trust, by thinking about solid logic and reasoning, and by thinking about emotion, by thinking about your audience's concerns. So they are not the same. Rhetorical appeals is part of rhetorical knowledge, but they're not the same thing. One is the full scope of the knowledge and understanding of writing situations, for one is the strategy. So we do use rhetorical appeals in all forms of communication. Each one focuses on that different piece of the writing situation, and we do this every day, whether we realize it or not, because all well-rounded writing situations use all 3 to some degree, especially persuasive ones. And as I keep, going back to, all writing or almost all writing is a little bit persuasive anyway, because there's a person in control of it who, does have their like little biases, and you select the information that you show people. So there's a little bit of persuasion in just about everything. And we use these appeals every day, whether you realize it or not. For example, if you wanted to borrow money from someone, you would first explain your situation and explain why maybe you need the money and give them good reasons for it. and that would be Logos. To get them to see like how like giving you this money, like it makes sense because you need it, like those good reasons. You might even try to get them to feel bad for you a little bit, try to gain some sympathy about how much, you really need this money and why, like what it's going to help you with and why, why you can't afford to do this without borrowing money. And sometimes that includes also like, gaining a little bit of sympathy. And then you would also, you want them to trust you and believe that you're going to pay this money back. So you give them good reasons like how, I have, a job where I have a paycheck coming in, so this is just a loan as soon as I get my paycheck, and this is telling them the day and time so they know like when you're going to get paid and all this stuff, and giving them reasons to believe that you're going to pay them back, and that's trust. And any good communication needs all three of those senses between the writer and the audience. And we're going to go into a little bit because we are going to talk about pathos, and pathos is emotion. And we're going to spend some time specifically talking kind of about pathos because there's kind of this myth that pathos is like the devil because it's emotion, and writing should never have emotion in it because that's bias and all this stuff. The truth is that pathos is easily abused because emotion is very persuasive, and because we do tend, when we're talking about things that we have opinions about, tend to be overly emotional. And pathos is one of those things that, it's not that you shouldn't use it, and almost all writing calls for some degree of pathos because it means a lot more than just emotion. But the problem with where people are and what they've learned about pathos is that we tend to think it's just emotion and it's just about manipulation, and it's not. However, it can be. So you do have to keep it balanced, and you have to pay attention to whether or not you're using pathos in the right ways. Whether or not you're using it to support things that you're talking about, and to keep your audience engaged, and whether or not you're using it fairly, or whether or not you're kind of going overboard and being overly emotional, and revealing a lot of bias and possibly be offending your audience or possibly manipulating them. And so it's pathos is tricky.